In this video lesson, we'll learn how to add complex numbers. You can learn in my video lesson, the introduction to complex numbers, what they are and where they come from. But now we're going to learn how adding them works. So let's say we have 2 plus 3i, one complex number, and we want to add to it the complex number 1 minus I. So the trick is that each complex number has a real part and an imaginary part. And these two parts, they don't mix. But the imaginary parts do mix. So for example, I plus I equals 2i. But I plus 1, you have a real and an imaginary part. It just stays as I plus 1. You can't mix it into one number. The I and the 1 have to stay separate. So what happens when we try to add complex numbers is that we have to match the real parts to each other and the complex parts to each other. That is, we add the like terms. So if, for example, in this case, we have 2 and 1 for the real parts, the numbers that are ordinary numbers, 2 plus 1. And for the imaginary numbers, we have 3i and negative I. So there we have this equation now. And of course, 2 plus 1 is just 3. And 3i minus I is just 2i. So that is how we add these two complex numbers. Alright, so what happens when we subtract complex numbers from each other? So let's say we have negative 1 minus 2i is one complex number. And then we subtract from it another complex number, 3 minus 4i. We do pretty much the same thing. We separate into real parts and imaginary parts, and we do the subtraction separately for each. So we get a negative 1 minus 3. That's the real part. Those are the ordinary numbers that we were used to. And then we have the imaginary part, negative 2i minus negative 4i. And these are all the numbers that have an I attached to it. We have to treat them separately from the ordinary numbers. So negative 2i minus negative 4i. So now our expression will become I'm going to rewrite this a little bit closer. Negative 2i minus negative 4i. And this equals to negative 1 minus 3 is equal to negative 4. And negative 2i minus negative 4i, well, negative minus negative 4i is the same as just adding 4i. So we're going to get 2i. So our final answer is going to be negative 4 plus 2i. Alright, now one last example. What happens if we have more than just one thing that are added or subtracted? So we have, in this case, 1 plus 2i minus 3 minus 2i plus 1 plus 3i. We have three numbers, one being subtracted, the other being added to the first. We do the same as before. We just take the real parts first, and that's going to be 1 minus 3 plus 1. And then we take the imaginary parts. So that's going to be 2i minus negative 2i, and then plus 3i. So again, we take the real numbers and we do all the operations on them separately. Then we take the imaginary numbers, all the numbers with I, and we do everything on them separately as well. And then we just, at the end, we'll get negative 1 plus 7i. And that's our final answer. I hope you found this video lecture helpful. Thank you for watching.